Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Johnson from NSF Pharma Sciences. I'm very pleased to welcome delegates to this webinar from over 20 countries. That's as diverse as UK, Georgia, France, Germany, South Africa, India, South Korea, Ireland, USA, Japan, Australia, and Italy, and several more besides. We've got 30 minutes together today to go through some slides that I've assembled that I think will help you see the connection between ICHQ9, quality risk management, and how to generate a contamination control strategy. So the contamination control strategy is an incredibly important part of the requirements of EU GMP Volume 4 Annex 1. And I'm going to give you some insights into what a contamination control strategy is, how to generate one, and how to use one. So for many of you, you've been to our webinars several times before, so I'm not going to speak too much about us as a leading GMP consultancy. I think you know of our expertise in specialist training, in auditing, and consultancy across a variety of transformational projects. Many of you, of course, will know me as well from my previous webinars and from my interactions around the industry and research that I do within the industry. I won't dwell on that too much at all. Let's move straight into it. So, what I'm going to talk about is how ICHQ9 has developed as a key guidance for industry and how it relates directly to the importance of having a contamination control strategy. Now, this is particularly important for those of you who are making sterile products and therefore have to comply with EU GMP Volume 4 Annex 1, but there's also an awful lot of very important learnings here for non-sterile products that can, and this toolkit for generating a strategy for managing contamination could be equally applied to other dosage forms and a variety of different types of products. So I'm going to talk about the best practice on how you can generate that strategy and how you can use it to improve product quality assurance. So many of you will have seen from previous webinars that Annex 1 is being updated, and it's been really a long time coming. The original Annex 1 was in 1996, and this is the first major revision since then. But the key reasons for making this upgrade to Annex 1 were all around the perception of risk. So there was a perception from the European medicines agencies that there was a change in the risk profile in sterile manufacturing companies, that the supply chains were becoming more diverse, more complex, more fragmented, that a number of new players were in the market, new expanding hubs for sterile products were being generated across the world, and some of the expectations within the original Annex 1 were just not very clear. They were somewhat ambiguous, and they allowed a fair amount of interpretation. Now, we all know that if we've got an ambiguous guidance or an ambiguous piece of legislation, it leads to a variety of approaches, and there was a perception that this variety of approaches was causing a degree of recurring GMP deficiencies during regulatory inspections. There was also a perception of risk around the turnover of expertise, in that this is a very fast-moving market. There were a lot of new players in the manufacturing hubs, a lot of new locations in the world, and some of the depth and breadth of experience across those hubs was not always what was expected. There's also a perception that some of the new players were start-up companies who were running at pretty low and narrow margins, and there were a lot of commercial imperatives on them making those products as soon as possible and taking some measured risks along the way. Some of those measured risks were justifiable and some of them clearly were not. So there was a real drive by the agencies to consider how more guidance, more direction could be given on what the GMP expectations were. Finally, there was a perception from the regulators from a variety of inspections around the world that internal education programs that are so important to developing that expertise in-house lack detail, or they lack practice, or indeed had no proficiency testing at all. And once the initial questions around the procedures and record sheets were posed and answered, there was a clear lack of understanding, a clear lack of know why from some of the respondents. So there was a real need to update Annex 1. Key messages, you may have seen this before, was really to make a much stronger link between ICHQ9 to Annex 1, to really drive the industry to use better and more thorough root cause analysis techniques, and to be able to generate product impact assessments that are truly justifiable, that are justified on logic, on data, on fact, on history, and on scientific principles rather than just opinion or precedent. There's a real drive in the new Annex 1 to be sure that we consider the education of our staff and their overall development far more effectively than what we've done previously. Having training just to put a tick in the box or to be able to fill in a spreadsheet is really not going to cut it anymore. So there was a real perception that our staff, who are very close to the assurance of quality of sterile products, you know, their habits, their behaviours, their decision making has a direct impact on the sterility assurance and quality of those products. Those staff need to be well educated in what they're doing. There was also a view that regardless of what policies and procedures are written, whatever training is performed, and however you supervise that outfit, there is a real need to think about how staff behave, what their habits are, what their attitudes are to quality, what their attitudes are to right first time. Understanding, of course, that in steriles manufacture, you're really looking for flawless, repeat execution of key stages, flawless execution. And you need to really think hard about staff behaviours to make that really happen. Of course, then there was a lot of information in the draft Annex 1 around the separation of staff from open or critical stages, and there were some special considerations for some new non-mainstream processes as well. So, what are the key steps in the management of risk, particularly for sterile products, but in fact for all pharmaceutical products? I wanted to draw your eye to this poster. This is a poster that I've seen several times in my travels through London recently, and it's a poster used by the British Transport Police to alert people to the perception of crime. So in order to be able to tackle crime effectively, the advice that we're getting from the British Transport Police is that we should see it, say it, and it will be sorted. And I've tried to use this poster as a way of keying into ICHQ9. So let's go through these main stages. The first thing is, do you actually see the risk? Do you actually see the risk for what it is? Are you so close to the issue that you actually don't see it anymore? Have you walked past that particular problem so many times now, or done some sort of superficial justification for its existence for so long now that actually you don't see it anymore? It doesn't appear on audit reports, it doesn't appear on agenda or management review. So for that reason, the first thing in risk management is you have to actually be able to see the risk for what it is. So all of your processes that are around the identification of risk have to be world-class. The second stage, say it. Well, it may be something that you see, but does your company culture actually allow you to articulate those concerns? Do you work in a blame-free culture? Is it an open and objective culture where you can actually articulate your concerns objectively with data? Sometimes some of these concerns may be quite uncomfortable, or they may be flying in the face of the trend or business of the company. But does your management team, does your leadership team promote a culture where you can actually speak out and say what you see? And then ultimately, of course, you've got to be able to sort it. You want to be able to generate the type of corrections, corrective actions, and preventive actions that are going to give you a long-term sustainable solution. And that solution is normally about the reduction of risk. You want to reduce the severity of a recurrence, you want to reduce the frequency of it reoccurring, and of course you want to make that risk as visible as possible. And it's interesting that in many parts of the industry we work with, the industry can be very good at understanding the risks. It can be pretty good at ranking those risks. But in terms of then applying rigorous corrective actions that are properly resourced, properly followed through, properly project managed to completion, is actually sometimes in some parts of the world a rare skill. So you really need all parts of this in order to be able to manage risk effectively. So, thinking back to a role that I had some years ago, my managing director said to me, "John, you're the quality director. You have one very simple job." And it made me laugh at the time because it didn't seem like I had one job. It seemed like I had 99 jobs with noise and distraction and information being fed to me all the time. But I think he articulated this very well to me in this particular job. And I think it goes very well for all of us in this industry. He said to me, "John, you've got one job. I need you to be expert at it, and I need you to grow the expertise of the people around you so that they are also expert in it." And what was that one job? Very simply, it was quality risk management. So let me explain what he really meant there. What he really meant was, first of all, he wanted to see no surprises. He wanted to know that my identification of risk processes, my approach, meant that there would be no surprises coming to him. He wanted to be aware of any perceived or possible risk to the business and to the product quality. So he was very encouraging in making sure that we had effective systems for seeing the problem in the first place. Then, of course, he wanted to make sure that I assumed nothing and that I shared those concerns freely with people who should be both responsible and accountable for resolving those issues. So it was no good just finding the issues, bottling them up, not talking about it, writing them into a report and leaving them on the shelf. This was about sharing it. And this is so important because, a problem that's shared is a problem half solved. And utilizing the expertise around you is a key part of that second stage. And then, of course, the third one is all about, well, how do I know I'm successful? Well, I know I'm successful in this role if the business and quality risks are well known and reduced year on year. And that will then show that whatever CAPA, whatever interventions, whatever actions I'm taking are actually effective for the business as a whole. So, how do I know that I'm seeing risk in the first place? Well, this is all around these key bullet points here, all around staff behaviours, shop floor work, office culture, spending time on the shop floor, doing your first, second and third tier auditing of your facility and your systems and your people. It's all about developing expertise and experience that actually can see the risk in the first place and then keeping it refreshed. It's so important for us, particularly those of us who are in a position for some time, that we do everything we possibly can to fight organizational myopia. You lose that 2020 vision very quickly if you don't do something to refresh it routinely. So then how do you know you're actually engaging with the risks? Well, the engagement comes from a variety of areas, such as management review, communication, team huddles, utilization of key performance indicators, and actually having a rigorous and very visible risk register that then defines the cascade of goals from the enterprise to the site level, to the department level, to the individual. And generating those goals in concert with budget. So you don't set goals you can't afford. You don't set goals that you have no budget for. You always make sure that your budget and goals run hand in hand. Of course, part of this as a leader, many of you, of course, on the call today are leaders and ambassadors for quality in your organization. You have to develop some form of safe and learning environment that allows people to speak out. You know, you really don't want to close down what might be conceived as criticism or close out people who have a concern or have a unique view of something. You really need those perspectives being spoken out in your team all the time. And then ultimately, you want to be able to call those issues out in clear, objective language that is just not steeped in drama and politics. You want it to be clear and objective. So, how do you know you're resolving the risks? Well, of course, you use a variety of root cause analysis tools. You look very frequently at the potential effect of human error, and you think about how you can design out human error and recurring deviations through simplification techniques. And it's so crucial that you continually use the variety of simplification techniques to actually design out areas of error. And we have a nice a video on how to bring simplification techniques to your organization in the link shown on the slide there. Obviously, you want to be sure that you've defined the kappa in a very clear and objective way, and you want to have some form of kappa effectiveness checks that show that you've reduced severity, or you've reduced the frequency of recurrence, or you've made that issue more visible and therefore more preventable. And the little equation there of risk probability number found in ICHQ9 is a very, very good way of showing whether the kappa that you've performed has actually been successful for the long term. So how does this apply directly to your sterile production unit? Well, I think I've said this a couple of times in other webinars, that this particular requirement is going to really make a huge difference to the way sterile facilities are inspected by the regulators and the way they're managed by the production and quality teams, and of course the way that the QC microbiology team interacts with the facility. Because the key requirement here in the CCS is that everything has to be visible. This has to be open book. Every perceived or possible risk within your organization has to be identified and measured and evaluated and ranked so that you can decide which of those you're going to mitigate and which of those you're going to simply justify as a low risk. The issue here, though, of course, is that this contamination control strategy then becomes an incredibly auditable document. It's going to be a document that's going to be asked for, I would say, on almost every day one of every inspection, because they want to know for sure that they see evidence of your proactive approach to contamination control. So how do you generate one? How do you generate one that's credible and useful? Obviously, use all the perceptions within your team. Use that multidisciplinary team of engineers, of microbiologists, of development staff, production, QA, QC to generate it. Make sure that you've got that culture, as I mentioned before, and that insight so that you can really see the brutal reality of your unit, so that you can see it in 20/20 vision, not obscured, not swathed in politics or swathed in language that obscures or makes the issue ambiguous, but something that is very, very clear. Great way to do that, of course, is to use process flows and map those risks, perhaps using things like FMEA as a key tool. Utilize ICHQ9 and the risk probability number to assess those risks. And then, of course, assess the risk against the risk of contamination and of misbranding and against compliance to Annex 1. But the thumb here on this six-fingered hand is very, very important. Because whatever you decide to do, once you've understood the risk and evaluated the risk, the first priority is to redesign whatever it is you're looking at to actually eliminate the risk for the long term. That doesn't mean a sticky plaster approach. It doesn't necessarily mean a new procedure or a new section in a procedure. It means redesign the process so that physically and logically and technically that issue and risk cannot recur. That will always be the first priority. If that's impossible, for whatever reason it may be, and you've explored every conceivable redesign that would be of value, the next thing is a test, some form of control, some sort of quality control test, so that you can say for sure whether the risk is there or not there. And then the final option is, of course, further checks, further monitoring, more batch record information, more second-person checks. The problem we have time and again in the industry is that the priority is the wrong way round, that we look for more checks, more tests before we actually redesign the process itself. So turn it on its head and look for a redesign rather than just a control or an additional check. A key reference I'll draw your attention to here as well is the PHS control strategy in the manufacture of sterile pharmaceutical and drug products. And there's some good information here about how to generate a control strategy and provide some detail as well on specifically managing contamination risks within your facility. And that's a very good starting point for your review, I would say. So, when you look at the draft to Annex 1, there are a number of sections within the proposed contamination control strategy, and this is shown in column 1 on this table. And you can see over the next 2 or 3 slides that there are a number of sections that need to be considered when you're putting together a CCS. Of course, in each case, you should delegate or designate a single point of accountability for each of those sections in the CCS. And it's good as well to give some guidance as to how you want people to identify and then assess those risks themselves. And there's a variety of sources of information that can be used according to the section shown on the slide there. Everything from auditing, Gemba walks, institutional knowledge, from understanding FMEA, understanding quality risk management, auditing, supply quality management, supplier maps, whatever it may be. So you're trying to use a multidisciplinary approach to get 20/20 vision on the risks against each of these sections. Then within each of the chapters, you describe the risks themselves, you describe the current set of precautions, and you describe the key concerns in very clear, objective language. You score them, avoiding the score of 5 out of 10, of course, because that will always lead to ambiguity, because you'll be sitting on the fence rather than claiming a high or low risk. And then by then ranking this section, you can then begin to think about proposing some smart kappa, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and target-orientated kappa. So the way we recommend putting this document together is to have separate groups of people looking at each of these sections, identifying a set of methodologies, identifying a set of sources of information, and then describing each risk in each section, scoring it, and then ranking it so that you can then decide which of those key risks need to be properly mitigated. And you'll see on the next couple of slides the same approach across each of the individual sections of the contamination control strategy. Then, of course, by pulling all of those sections together, you can then look at the overall risk to the product and start to think about individual kappa objectives, department objectives, maybe even enterprise objectives, certainly in the case of perhaps a redesign of a clean room or a transfer of products from one clean room to another. in such a way that those goals and objectives are then properly funded through the budgeting and S&OP system. So, as you can see, this is not something you do on a Friday afternoon. This is not something that will take just a week to do. And of course, it's not going to be anything else but a living document, because as you gain more information, as your staff become better at what they're doing, they become better at the know why as much as the know how, they will identify new risks that then need to be plugged into the system so that you can then assess and decide what you're going to do with each one. And of course, the key thing here is you want to be sure that your combined experts have found all of the perceived risks that are possible in your clean room. You really don't want a third party or a regulatory inspector to find a significant risk that you've not considered. And for that reason, of course, alongside this is often a very detailed training and development plan for your subject matter experts in sterile manufacturing. So, why didn't the industry do this years ago? Well, to be honest, the best of the industry did. But there were parts of the industry that really struggled with assembling a contamination control strategy, largely because risk registers were either feared or badly understood. Feared because it can sometimes give you bad news. It can sometimes be telling you that your facility, your legacy facility, is inadequate, or your process for aseptic interventions needs to change, or your gowning system is inappropriate for the classification of clean room. And of course, everybody, it's human nature, I guess, to some degree, fears change. There is a degree of anger and denial whenever anything new or bad news occurs. Until we can actually evaluate it and calm down and then take into account the next steps, there is an element of fear. So people didn't run towards doing this type of assessment in many parts of the world. But of course, it's now going to be a regulatory requirement. The other aspect here is that in some cases, risk management tools, particularly ICHQ9 and the risk probability number, have been used to try and defend bad design or poor practice. So people have used ICHQ9 as a way of defending a situation that occurred that was not predicted, not desired, and had a deleterious effect on the quality of the product. So they've used these tools to try and say, okay, it happened, but it's okay, we haven't killed anyone, we haven't risked the product, we haven't had a bad inspection yet, so we're going to go ahead and carry on as we are. And that is obviously a pretty poor thing to do and really not sustainable for the long term. The final reason for not running to this in the past as well, of course, is that risk registers sometimes have been used as a way of filling up empty shelves. They've not been used very proactively, and they've not led to any significant action. And when that happens, that's only going to frustrate everybody, because you can imagine people were asked to contribute to the risk register. They gave over their valuable time to generate it, but then when no action is taken, it gives a very, very poor message to the staff. So, if you don't generate a contamination control strategy, of course you're going to miss opportunities to reduce risk. You're also going to really miss opportunities to reduce waste. There are some fantastic dividends that we're seeing from people who have embraced this approach and been very thorough in this approach, because they're identifying for themselves a variety of areas that could be targeted to remove cost, unpredicted waste, or reworking, or reject batches, of course. So this is actually an extremely good business skill and a business imperative, as well as something that will control your contamination risks. And ultimately, of course, this isn't the main reason, of course, but ultimately, if you don't generate a CCS, this will be seen as a GMP violation. So next steps. Well, I always say this, and now you've heard this, and now you've considered some of the key messages, it's time to get moving. It's time to get access to some information and to engage with your wider group, your colleagues and your friends in the industry, in your company, to do something about this. Of course, you can contact us if you wish to access our model process for generating a CCS. We have a very detailed, structured methodology for this so that you miss nothing, you evaluate properly, and you take the correct actions for the future. We also have a model example from a clean room that we worked with so that you can see what one actually looks like that would meet CGMP expectations. And of course, in the process of this, you get access to amazing experience and expertise within our team across the industry and specifically in sterile management. And finally, of course, and I say this every single time, if there was one skill that we need to be so good at in this industry, it's how to identify, speak out, and manage quality risks in all its forms. So we can really help with that as well. Just be aware of some of the other things that we can offer, particularly I would say on this slide, our e-learning service, because we provide an awful lot of support either via very economic, very accessible e-learning sessions, or also via free of charge webinars that are available on our website. So, please feel free to contact us, interact with our free services and our paid services as well, of course, so that we can help you make that transformational change that you desire in your organization. So the next time I'll be on the webinar schedule will be on June the 25th. I'm doing some research at the moment with my colleagues and clients on the trends and hot topics in the manufacture of biotech products. So I'm going to be able to give you an insight that could help you generate audit aid memoirs in this area, to help you generate quality technical agreements if you're outsourcing biotech products, and of course to help you with the preparation for your internal and external GMP inspections. So hopefully you can join me again on June the 25th. So thank you very much for listening. I think I've taken about 30 minutes of your time now. I hope that this proves useful to you. You know where I am. Many of you have met me as well, so it'd be great to link up again. And hopefully this is of some value to you. Many thanks for listening, and take care.
Stand by.